Welcome to the second Intermezzo of the Hic Sunt podcast. As explained before, these Intermezzos are shorter ad hoc videos, off the cuff as it were, a little bit, dealing with maybe some current issues, current topics, in between the major episodes of the podcast. The next major episode, next main episode of the podcast should come out on the first Monday of August. So the World Cup just concluded yesterday, in fact, and as usual, it was also plagued by debates, issues, problems regarding FIFA. Yeah? FIFA being the international organization that organizes this competition. So from a political science perspective, let's talk a little bit about FIFA and understand what it is, so that we can situate it better, and then from there, maybe with this information we can understand better why such problems can occur. So from a political perspective, political science perspective, what is FIFA? Yeah? It's an international organization, but it's very important to understand this term international organization. In fact, it is an international non-governmental organization, right? So in the field of international relations, which is a subfield of the discipline of political science, the way it is international relations are discussed is that we live in a world, internationally, in a world of states, yeah, of what you would call countries. This is a very recent occurrence, by the way, a very recent situation, basically in the last 100 years. So the best way to explain this is you look at the globe, right? You look at the political map of the world, yeah, of the globe, and not the geographical one, the political one. And what you see is different patches of different colors and lines, right? And the entire Earth, meaning the inhabitable part, not the ocean, not the waters, are covered with these different patches of different colors, which we call countries, which we call states. And this, for us, seems to be like, well, this is normal. There's nothing normal about this, yeah? This is a very specific form of political organization and a very specific way of dividing authority around the world that really only came about in the last 100 years. And to prove that, you just have to look at the map of the world, from 200 years ago, 300 years ago, and so on. And you see that there's many patches of the globe that are white, yeah? Meaning they're not colored. They don't. Well, the reason why they're not colored is that they don't have this specific form of organization, which is the modern state. They have other forms of organization, tribes, and so on, but they don't have this specific form of organization. Now, why have we reached this point where the entire world is attributed to different states, which, by the way, as I said, there's nothing normal or natural about it, yeah? The big mistake would be to think that each state is a different population with a different language, a different culture, and we're just neatly divided. The world is just neatly divided into these different peoples who run themselves. That's absolutely not true. Absolutely not true. States are, the modern state is a set of institutions, yeah? A set of institutions that has sovereignty over a territory and over its members being the citizens. And through a number of things, as I said, in order to understand how we got here, well, there's a process. But I'm not going to go into that because that's not the topic of today. But there's a process that started basically in the 17th century, and that led to this form of organization which was invented in Europe to spread around the world. Again, not because it was natural or organic or represented reality. It doesn't. Most states around the world are random drawings of territories with a mishmash of populations, yeah? Because human beings never lived in states. Human beings lived in smaller groups. A tribe, a clan is a regional group is the normal form of sociocultural organization for human beings. So, anywho, today we live in a world of states in the sense that all authority in the world is assigned to states, and each individual state is assigned sovereignty. States recognize each other's sovereignty. Sovereignty meaning that only that state has the authority over that territory and its population. Its population is, we call them citizens. Yeah. So this like a world of little gods yeah, deities, each of them in charge with uniquely and separately and exclusively over a territory and over their members, like a club. Okay, so where does FIFA fit into all this? Well, this is the interesting part about international relations, that at this level, international, which is basically interstate level, yeah, so politics between states, not within states, the actors are not only the states. They might be the main actor today, but there are also things such as multinational corporations that act internationally, yeah, multinational corporations, so businesses. There are also transnational networks of various kinds. Can be legal or illegal. A drug network, a trafficking network is also an international actor. But there's also international organizations, some of them made of states, where the states themselves are members of these organizations, like the UN or NATO. Yeah, NATO, UN, EU, right, are international organizations made of states, whose members are states. But there are thousands, tens of thousands of international non-government organizations. And FIFA is one such INGO. You know? It's an organization that acts internationally or interstates, yeah, across states. But its members are private individuals or other associations or other non-governmental organizations. Non-governmental meaning it's not run by the government. And that's what FIFA is. Okay, the next thing to understand is that in this world of states, the international relations sort of theory or scholarship sort of talks about the world of international relations, meaning interstate relations, this international level, being in a state fundamentally, originally of anarchy. Anarchy being not disarray, but as in from Greek, anarchy means there's no government, yeah, because there's no government above the states. Yeah, this is why we live in a world of states internationally. There's no world government. The UN is not a world government. It's just a place where states meet. So anarchy is a state where there's no government. Well, internationally there is no government, so fundamentally, in theory, this would be a state of anarchy. Now, it's not anarchy as disarray because we have created order in this level of international relations through various means, through treaties, meaning agreements between states, through organizations that states join together, that created rules of behavior. And UN is such an international organization, and it helps to create order in the world. And in fact, there's a deeply structured order internationally, because otherwise we wouldn't have, shirts from China and have internet or even travel abroad, because you have to understand the power of a state ends at its border, no matter which state it is, be it the United States or Russian Federation or whichever. They don't have any authority beyond their borders. So how can we have international travel? We have international travel because we have international organizations where states have joined and reached agreements that they all agreed to respect, that create the rules, yeah, for international travel. But this is very important that, so there's a deeply structured order, but at the same time, it remains that there is no international government. Now, why is this important? Because rules, order, is created by, in various ways. As I said, we created internationally to treaties, which are agreements that we all respect and so on. But let's say within a country, who creates order is the government of that country, right? A government does three things. Any government that is a government needs to do three things. One, make rules, which is legislation, lawmaking. Enforce the rules with a set of institutions, the courts, the police, the judicial system, the various other institutions that collect taxes, that enforce, make those rules reality on a day-to-day basis. And also adjudicate conflicts regarding those rules, meaning there needs to be some institutions that when you don't understand how the rule should be applied, or you have a conflict regarding the application, or you break the rule, they create order, they clarify the issue, and reinforce the order. That's the judicial system, the courts, basically. Yeah? So any government needs to do, make rules, enforce rules, adjudicate rules. Now let's think about FIFA, which is not unique in this sense. Sports, international sports, global sports is a modern phenomenon because only in modernity do we have a global society, in the sense we have the tools, the technology, and the means to have global and things that we share globally. So sports, how can you play basketball anywhere in the world? Because the rules have been internationalized, the structures have been internationalized, and this thing would not have been possible before the, let's say, 19th century, which is when the modern sports came about. And with technology, transportation, communication, we could create universal systems of rules. Yeah, well, there's international organizations that run different sports. FIFA runs football, soccer. Yeah. Its name is the International Federation of Association Football. It's a federation of federations, actually, because its members are the national federations. Yeah. So why do we have FIFA? Because FIFA manages globally the sport. Yeah. But okay, well, that's not a big deal. But let's think about it. Managing this sport means what? Making rules, enforcing those rules, and also adjudicating those rules. And this whole practice, this whole sport of football, of soccer, it is obviously also a money-making product. It's a commercial product as well. There's a business dimension. So FIFA also manages a huge financial wealth. I think this World Cup, I think it was one of the most productive in that sense. I think the yield was at $10 billion or something of that nature. But who manages that? FIFA. Now, FIFA is a non-profit, meaning it doesn't. There's no shareholder. Nobody gets rich of it. Yeah. I sold more the computers. I'm getting more money, like Bill Gates. Yeah. No. It's a non-profit, meaning that all the yield is reinvested in the organization. And but what we need to understand is that this non-government organization, INGO, who doesn't have any government above it, because internationally there is no government, and here's where the problems start appearing, has immense power because it runs an activity that involves billions of people around the world. Because it makes rules and enforces those rules, right? Some of the problems in the World Cup came about how it managed that job to make rules and enforcing the rules universally, the rule of law. Clearly it failed with the whole Balogun, President Trump making phone calls to the president of FIFA issue, right? So it failed deeply in that sense, in its main job. And also adjudicates rules because there's all kinds of disciplinary adjudicating bodies within FIFA, one which was involved exactly in this scandal. So what we need to understand is this unique situation of not just FIFA, the International Olympic Committee is the same. And when we comment about, the possibility of corruption, and the previous president of FIFA was, tried and so on, sentenced to something, Sepp Blatter and so on, and the problem comes from this idea, from the status of these organizations, right? And the lack of accountability. Now, where can accountability come from once we understood what FIFA is? So one more time. FIFA is like basically a mini government. Well, actually, not so mini, but mini in the sense of it's not a state government, but it is a government because it makes rules, enforces rules, and adjudicates rules over a whole area of life. Right, just like and it is given this independence because sport needs to be autonomous and separate from politics. That's the whole point. So states recognize this autonomy of sport bodies to make their own rules and enforce them. But understand that otherwise states run all your life, all aspects of your life. But in this area, which is soccer, football, or basketball, or whatever, in this case with soccer, football, it's FIFA who runs that area aspect of your life internationally. Now, continentally, there are different organizations like UEFA in Europe, which runs sports at international level in Europe. And then nationally, there's national federations which run that sport there. But it's a hierarchy in the sense that the rules are universal. So there's things that FIFA, which only manages international competitions above the continents, between the continents, yeah. However, also manages the general rules of the game and so on. Doesn't make the rules of the game, which is a different organization called IFAB, for reasons of the history of soccer, but football. But it does manage internationally the rules of the game, and it is the Federation of Federations. Okay, so how do we get to accountability? So how can FIFA be accountable? Well, first of all, does it have external accountability? Well, there's no international government, but there are states. And states are sovereign over the territory and membership. So when Sepp Blatter was prosecuted and found guilty and whatever, and now there was a threatened prosecution against Infantino at the beginning of his term, I think, they were done by national courts, because there's no international court with obligatory sort of power that it can enforce its judgments, because there's no international government. So courts, so how could that be? That a national court could prosecute an international body, yeah? Or its president or whatever. It's because the activity of FIFA happens within countries, because it happens on earth, on territories that fall under the sovereignty of different countries. So if you do whatever financial mishandling or whatever you do, and it breaks on that territory, or using the banks of that state, or using the money moving apps, software companies of that state, or whatever, anything that falls, if you use or have effects anywhere under the jurisdiction of that state is obligated to enforce its laws, and if you break those laws, you can be prosecuted. Yeah. Also, FIFA has, it's not on the moon. FIFA's location is in Switzerland, so it falls in its activity as an entity within Switzerland, although it's an international organization, it falls under the laws of Switzerland. So there's national courts, and I say this because some of these egregious things that just happened, so how can we fix them? Well, as I said, one of the tools is national courts. Second, there's other things as well, of course. Governments have influence, and again, they should not have influence over the game. And the EU Parliament, someone from the EU Parliament just spoke to this during this scandal with Balogun. He said that EU has to respect, or maybe it was a commissioner from the EU, that it respects the autonomy of sports and of sports organizations, which they should. At the same time, there is an implicit and explicit influence of governments and of entities such as the European Union to put formal or informal pressure in the right direction. But legally, it's the national courts. Policies can be passed by national governments or the EU, which is a sort of a supranational arrangement. Not a federation, but a sort of a supranational common decision-making entity. And there's a good example of this when when the EU in the 90s, EU is a common market, has become a common market, and that was one of its goals, meaning you should be able to freely live, move, work wherever in any state member of the EU. That was one of the goals of the EU. So you cannot impede the free movement of workforce. And the UEFA rules, maybe even FIFA rules, but UEFA rules or the rules of different federations in the 90s was that, the number of foreign players in the clubs were limited. How many foreign players the club could have, and there was then a case brought against this practice because this practice violated the EU law that has to do with the free movement of workforce, and the EU law takes precedence, just like national government rules, laws take precedent, and that changed football because the UEFA had to comply, implicitly even FIFA, if I'm not mistaken, and because its players play there. And since then, any club can have as many foreign players as famously Chelsea during Abramovich, maybe even today, had 0 British English players in the team and coaches or managers. So there's policy making that can be done that will implicitly affect FIFA. Yeah, so laws can be passed that implicitly affect FIFA, but national courts are the immediate way of remedying certain issues. That's the external accountability. What's the internal accountability? Well, there are bodies, especially after the scandals with Sepp Blatter. There's now a term limit for how long a president can be elected. But let's just quickly go into the structure of FIFA, very, very quickly. So the FIFA is a federation of federations, and it has, if it is a government, it is, let's approach it as such. It has a parliament, which is made of the member associations, the member federations. So each country has its own football federation, and each country then has one member in this Congress of FIFA. Yeah, so think of it as the parliament of football, wherein the individual members of the parliament are the individual national federations. Of course, UK has a separate federation for England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and so on. Okay, this Congress, this parliament, votes on the big things regarding FIFA. So it's a representative democracy of sorts. And it also elects the president. Yeah. So they can also hold him accountable. But do they want to hold him accountable? And here you get into the issues, internal issues of FIFA. Because there has been a practice of Sepp Blatter, and Infantino took it over because it's a base of his power, to endear themselves to the big masses, chunks of members of the FIFA Congress, meaning the many football associations around the world from countries that don't really play a big role in football itself. FIFA, one of the things that FIFA does is redistributes money, meaning it supports money to develop football in places where it's not so developed, which is a good thing. It has to be as a part of its job, which is wonderful. But there's a line between supporting them and, sort of buying their allegiance. And some of these countries are not as, their internal systems are not as free of corruption as maybe, let's say, Western European systems. So the whole scandal with Sepp Blatter was because of bribes that were given to these various federation heads, or in any way, even if it's not a bribe, because some and most of these, the federation members of the FIFA Congress are from such countries that don't really matter in football. They're small countries. Trinidad and Tobago has a football federation. I'll just give a random example. Equatorial Guinea has a football federation. Tuvalu probably has a football federation, and so on, right? Micronesia has a football federation, yeah? They don't have, in the Congress, they have one vote just like Germany, France, which is not bad, is in theory, but it leads to this mechanism where FIFA presidents buy out, in many ways, the allegiance of these federations, because they're fine with getting the money and allowing then the president to do things beyond what is acceptable, such as getting calls from President of the United States and sort of suspending a rule overnight or whatever. But so this is the problem of internal accountability. It is a major problem. Now, of course, the countries can withdraw from federations, can withdraw from the Congress, from the FIFA. There was talk about what if UEFA withdraws from FIFA. In any case, the situation is not tenable this way, yeah, because what this Infantino person has been doing has been outrageous and, again, goes against the mission of FIFA. That's the problem, yeah, which is to be an impartial manager of the universal sport of soccer, which does not belong to FIFA, but belongs to the people who play it. How about other internal tools of accountability? Well, there are various committees, but for example, one of the first things that Infantino did, if I recall correctly, was to remove from one of the committees on discipline people who have started an inquiry into him before he was elected as president. And again, the fact that this can happen shows that this governmental system of FIFA, which, as I said, has a parliament, has an executive led by the president. There's a secretariat, which is sort of the executive branch, the administration of FIFA, and so on. Yeah, It should have internal checks, and like any political system, right? That make sure that none of the internal actors, whether the executive, the legislature, or the judiciary, crosses the line. Yeah. Now, this is an eternal problem around the world. How many countries does this work well? But this is the context, and this was the purpose of this brief intermezzo video, to kind of talk about what FIFA is and how it functions, to better contextualize the recent debates and scandals. Otherwise, the World Cup was a blast.